So we can go ahead and get started as people keep rolling in. Hi, my name is Nathan. I use they, them pronouns. Welcome to Asian Tea, Understanding Queer and Trans Asian Pacific Islanders Wellbeing in Austin. It's a panel about queer and trans API individuals here in Austin, detailing their ongoing narratives as we dispel the myths about the intersections of our identities. This powerful panel, we'll be discussing topics about racism and the model minority myth to what community support and community celebration looks like to our community. Asian tea was inspired by the experience shared by many Asian cultures of sharing tea with guests. Tea is a form of hospitality, and many communities gather around tea to talk. We hope to join us as we share in the experiences and narratives of all of our panelists here today. I want to introduce Quỳnh-Hương, who's going to be our moderator today, as well as Wes, who is the Trans Wellness Program coordinator. So we can go ahead and get started there. Quỳnh-Hương?
Sure. Did you wanted me to introduce myself and then jump to the panelists?
Yeah, and then we can jump to Wes for the Trans Wellness Program.
Awesome. So hi everybody, my name is Quỳnh-Hương. I use she, they, she, and Jen pronouns, and I'm one of the co-leaders for Austin Queer Asians, and as well as serving as the assistant director for the Gender and Sexuality Center at UT Austin. So yeah, Wes?
Hi everyone, I'm Wes Cowan. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm the lead clinician of the Transgender Wellness Program at Out Youth. And our program is open to all trans-identified and gender questioning folks that are 18 and over. And we don't mess with the hierarchies of transness, and we try to be a very open space. And we provide letters for folks in need of letters for furthering their transition however they need and want. And we have a community closet that's the Queer and Trans Closet, where we have shelf-stable food, HEB gift cards, 31-day bus passes that we're able to provide the community. Anybody that identifies as LGBTQIA+ is eligible for the closet, and for youth, their family is also eligible. So yeah, we just try to create a very welcoming space that hopefully seems like family to people, because it's family to me.
And we're gonna go with our panelists. So which one of y'all would like to introduce yourselves with names, pronouns, and how you identify?
I'll go ahead and go first. My name is Nathan Pham, full name Nathan Nguyen Pham. I am the Transgender Education Network of Texas field organizer. I've been working for the last few months working on this year's election, now be helping build some resources for transgender individuals here in the surrounding area. I am a Louisianan-born, Texas-raised Vietnamese American activist. I've been in activism for the last 3 years. Specifically, I started in higher education, and I moved on to HIV prevention, where I did education, queer and trans visibility, also advocating for positional QT BIPOC empowerment. So after graduating and moving on from AIDS Services of Austin, I started my position here at Tent. That's me.
Thank you, Nathan. Jae, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I can go. And you'll have to excuse me, I'm outside, so if there's background noise, I'm so sorry, but this is the best place for this vibe. But my name is Jae, my pronouns are he and him. I'm gender fluid, transmasculine, and I'm a writer. I was raised in Austin. I've been here since I was 5, so I'm about as close to a native as you'll find. I'm ethnically Black, Samoan, and Japanese. My mother was born and raised in American Samoa. I was raised in the confines of that culture, and with the Japanese part of me, I've participated in as much as I could. And I'm raising, as a single parent, raising a queer identifying Korean child. I'm heavily active in queer fandom. I write lots of stories exploring relationships from queer, trans, and BIPOC perspectives. In my free time, I pole dance, I cosplay, I'm a veteran. I'm also a survivor of domestic abuse, and I'm an advocate for sex workers. I live in South Austin with my kiddo, and I'm attending college to become a social worker.
Awesome. Thank you, Jay. Jasmine, would you like to go next?
Which one? But
Oh, paper, scissors, rock.
Hi, I'm Jasmine, or Jiesu. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a poet, artist, care worker, and disability justice activist in ATX. I've had some of my written work in visual art published in Button Poetry, Right About Now, Muzzle Magazine, Damaged Good Press, and elsewhere. And some labels that resonate more closely with my experiences are non-binary, transgender, gender fluid, polysexual, queer, and disabled, spoony, crip, neurodivergent, mad, and biracial. And I am ethnically white and Taiwanese.
All right, Jasmine, you know who I'm talking about.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jasmine. I go by she, they pronouns. I identify as a disabled, queer, lesbo, genderqueer person in this town, as a proud dad of a doggy named Pixel and a cat named Jalebi. I spend most of my time, well, at work, and then outside of work in a couple organizing spaces, primarily in advocacy for a just or a people's budget for the city of Austin, one that would ideally see a lot of reduced funding for the police. I think that's it. I'll keep it short. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you so much, everyone. It was really wonderful. Yeah? Okay. I wasn't sure if I heard anything else. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for introducing yourself. And it's so cool to see the amazing diaspora and diversity within the Asian program, Asian community, even in Austin. I say program because I'm working on another program already for something else. Anyway, so one of the things that we want to explore, oftentimes the Asian community is often overlooked or oversighted due to the model minority myth. And so one of the things that we wanted to explore with all of y'all is how can we support Asian queers or folks who identify as Asian and queer?
I think from my perspective, and please stop me if this isn't exactly the right way to answer that question. With the model minority myth, there's always that concept, I think, especially from people outside of our communities, that, oh, they're good, they don't need anything. They're usually well off, or they're usually well educated. It's not the case in my situation. My sister is the first person to go to college on my side, and it was not paid for. She had to pay her debt off herself. And same with me, I'm funding my own education at 31. So I think that and especially in terms of education, the kind of I'm trying to figure out how to say this. The kind of resources that I get as a Black person should extend to us as Asians and as queers and as Pacific Islanders.
Thank you, Jay. Did anybody else want to add on to that?
Yeah, I will go ahead and follow up. I mean, I think one of the main issues, especially with the rise of like anti-Asian and the xenophobic sentiments coming from not only legislation but as well as just this emboldenment here in the U.S. has really shown how difficult and oversimplified some of our experiences are, right? And so one of the main things I would really ask when coming and talking about how to support queer Asians is interrupting those moments and kind of like showing forms of integrity when you're talking about Asian individuals or when someone else is talking about Asian individuals. Some form of bystander intervention all the way to self-education or educating the ones around you. It's really about those really, really important narratives that are often forgotten or put to the side. I mean, we're going to get into it and talk about it. I think all of us have something to say about how being Asian during COVID is complicated, right? And it's complicated to see either community members, friends, family, coworkers, and everyone close to us either go through one form of like continuous traumatization as we walk through just being in COVID, period. But it's difficult when we have to be able to navigate like public spheres if we have the ability to do so when it comes to racism, right? And so I feel like education and standing up and showing solidarity in those moments become some of the beginning moments, and then after that is what you are able to do in the area around you, right? I think with how Halloween went this year, less people did show up and show out, but there were still Instagram photos and things like that, even right now, right? I guess I'd start there.
May I add to this question as well? I did want to say, Jay, thank you for sharing your perspective on how the model minority really does, the concept allows for ignoring folks who kind of don't fit that stereotype of like, oh, you're good, you know, you're doing what you're doing. But me as a person who like has class privilege to some degree, like, you know, I grew up not wanting from, I mean, we weren't like super rich, but that wasn't something that I like had to worry about because my parents were in an okay situation, and because overall Indian Hindus are in one of the highest income brackets in the U.S. So for me, I've kind of so for me personally, I've kind of evolved around, like I've moved past this idea of like, oh, people expect perfection and assimilation, etc. And to me, it's like glaring how anti-Black the concept of model minority is, to hold up one group and say, you know, like, look, like these folks can do it. Why can't all of you? You know, like
Why can't you?
Every other minority in the U.S., even though our situations are drastically different, and it's a cruel thing to do, and it fuels white supremacy, and I think that's really what sticks out for me. And then, if I may quickly add on to what Nathan was saying around how you can support queer Asians in this time, specifically, I definitely think, I know it's 101, but like if you're a straight Asian person watching, please confront the homophobia in your families, because like as someone who's in my 30s and not out to my extended family, it's because I've seen more cousins than I can count say something homophobic, and cousins that I can count on one hand actually push back on that, and that has an effect. And it's a simple thing that even something as simple as like, hey, that's not cool, and then kind of the bigger interruptions that Nathan covered, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I think adding on to a lot of what y'all were saying, just like two main things that I think of are, one, I think when we talk about Asians, that's such a huge term, and we really do have to think about how people are affected differently, and there's privilege within the groups, right? And so like my experience as someone who's often perceived as white is not going to be the same as someone who's not perceived as white, right? And then the other side of that is that Austin queer Asians can experience a lot of different oppressions besides queerphobia and besides racism, right? As a disabled individual, ableism really impacts my life. So when events are not accessible, it's not accessible to all queer Asians, right? Because you're leaving out disabled queer Asians. And so I think like one thing I would also just like thinking about, right, is that how do we understand that within our communities, there are people who experience like the whole range of oppression, right? Or experience different parts of that. I think that's really important to also be talking about.
do want to add a final thought, is that when talking about, you know, class struggle as well as just like generalized income, you know, Asians in this country are one of the fastest growing populations, right? And so there is an urgency and there is an extreme need to be able to tackle some of the blind spots or some of the normalized ignorance around how far and wide the diaspora is for Asians here in the US, right? Southeast Asians themselves also face, me being Vietnamese, Southeast Asians face, you know, a higher rate of unemployment and like earning potential because of either the difficulty that other Americans or other individuals here in the US may face when even pronouncing our name, or all the way down to the fact that we have to fight to be able to voice our opinion.
One of the things I think I want to make a add, I should have done this before. Not everybody knows what the model minority myth might mean, and maybe some folks have a general idea of it. So I do want to drop in a little bit of a definition just for folks who are watching on the side. If you don't know what it means, the model minority myth is generally specifically geared towards those who are identify as Asians, and typically those are who are perceived as higher achieving in higher degree of socioeconomic success than the population average. And typically we are talking about saying that folks who identify as part of the Asian diaspora will succeed and achieve higher than other BIPOC communities. And it's often used as a wedge against other BIPOC communities too, and doesn't always capture the huge diaspora such as our South Asian, our Southeast Asian, our West Asian, our Pacific Islanders, our biracial, multiracial, and all the different intersections that comes with it, just as all of our panelists have talked about. So I do want to make that very clear, and it is often used as a tool. And some folks may say, well, isn't that a great compliment to be the model minority? Well, not necessarily, right? Because it can cause a lot of mental health disparities, oftentimes oversight and providing resource support for our Asian folks. And also used as, and it's also stems from white supremacy as well. So thank y'all for that. I know we touched on this question a little bit. So let's do a little remix on it, right? How has the model minority affected your experience when it comes to navigating your personal, professional, and maybe academic or community life, right? So it really depends on how you want to go about that. So we can touch on assimilation, family, perfectionism, mental health, whatever it is you feel like inspires you. You know, just ignore my singing. But yeah, go for it. Go for it, y'all.
I have so much to say about this one. Again, I come from my father's side, he's Black from Louisiana, Houston Black, and my mom is Samoan and Japanese. And they're, you know, growing up in Austin does not have a huge Black population. And for that matter, especially in the 90s, we didn't have a huge Asian population. So assimilation was a thing. I mean, my mom, and I'm not sure if this was a conscious decision of hers, but all of my cousins speak our native language except for me and my sister. She kind of actively did not do that because she didn't want us, you know, there's a kind of idea that if you are speaking Samoan, or if you have a bigger connection with our homeland, then you're not going to be as successful, or you're not going to be as good, you're not going to do as well in school. I do remember that she did tell me that. So there was that. There was always this kind of drive for me to hide in my Asian and in my Pacific side and not be Black. So, which is very backwards. And it's like for me, it was like I had to run into that model minority myth. And it is very demeaning. Once you realize and understand what it means, and that it means that white people are expecting you to behave like them to make your existence palatable. And it is the mental health effects of that are very bad. I'm still dealing with them. And, you know, I didn't realize it until relatively late in my life that that's what was going on. And it's very traumatic. And I'm in the fortunate position of being basically a first generation queer parent, that I have a queer child who is Asian and who is Black. And I get to raise them to be proud of being both, and, you know, and to be able to navigate those pitfalls in society that I didn't get a chance to do.
I'll go ahead and go next. I think with the model minority myth, I have definitely seen it, and I was raised in the 10th largest Vietnamese community here in the U.S., which is Arlington, Texas, and kind of the surrounding areas leading up to Fort Worth and Dallas. And we were often pitted against other BIPOC individuals, as well as kind of this weird expectation that we were in the process of being invited into whiteness, right? And so there was levels of how even academically as a young individual, we are expected to always overachieve, make that 101, 102, 120 in school, right? And do more than what was possible, right? And there's like layers of ableism and perfectionism and kind of that the work of being an immigrant in this country, especially for individuals who were newly immigrated in the last few decades, right? And not just from the Vietnamese War. And so for me in that time, right, I was raised only speaking Vietnamese up only till I was 3 or 4, and we would speak Vietnamese at home. However, I would immediately be faced with so many struggles in school as I was learning ESL, as I was working through not putting too long of a line on my P's, right? Like, or my D's and B's looked all the same. It was just kind of like this process in which assimilation was not only forced on my parents, right, who grew up in the hyper-capitalistic 80s here in the US, but also through language, right? And it is now at 25, my desire to learn Vietnamese is something that had to be fanned through me, right? I had to be able to stoke that fire on my own. And it's kind of this weird situation, right? Where by the time I was a teenager, I felt like a minority in my own home, being the only, American, right? And then going out into the world and being a minority again, being another Asian, right? And so that really played into how it fed my work as an individual in the workforce when I experience some form of what white folks consider like positive racism, right? Which is just racism. It's still racism, where this individual, even though the team was mostly of Spanish-speaking folks, this individual liked hiring Asians because he knew that we would work harder to prove ourselves, right? That was the idea that he had in his mind until I was exploited, right? And burnt out and kept trying to work, right? With that feeling of being this model, this mold that I only had power over, and only I could achieve greatness if I were to be the best that I could, right? That what my mother and my great aunt and grandfather has sold me so far, right? They continue to push me through until I was an adult, and I'm just now getting around to not doing that, right? And not listening to that voice anymore.
Yeah, thank y'all for sharing. My experience of the model minority myth has been interesting. I think, like, in my family, being white and Asian, there have always been weird racial dynamics in the family. And I was like sort of in this position of simultaneously having a lot of privilege in the outside world, but being seen as Asian by the white side of my family and being mistreated for that reason, right? And I think, like, I also have, like, just memories of, like, just being how, like, when people can put you adjacent to something that's not white, then something switches, right? There is an othering that happens. I remember being in kindergarten and a kid called me yellow snow. And I didn't know what that meant at the time. And it took me a really, really long time. And I know that kid probably heard it from a parent, right? Or something like that, right? Because honestly, I don't think that kindergarteners usually like say stuff like that. But I think it just really showed how, I don't know, just how prevalent it is, right? That, and I also think of being, my experience as a disabled person, from birth, I've been disabled. And so I've always been physically disabled. I've always also had like mental illness and stuff like that. But that's not as visible to other people. And there was this need as a disabled person, to prove to others that I was capable. And put on top of that the model minority myth, the expectation that you are capable. And so for a long time, I was overworking myself. I mean, and sometimes I still continue to overwork myself, continue to, I don't know, just sort of, I think it's like a weird combination of like being expected to, but also not being expected to be capable at the same time, to where all of my academic achievements or anything I did in that vein was always attributed to my Asianness, and all of my failures were attributed to my disability. And so in both cases, I was not given like the space for that to have been because of me, right? It was always because of some other identity I had, right? And so, yeah, so I think like assimilation was a really big part of my experience, right? Seeing like trying to be as white as possible, being encouraged by family to be as white as possible, and also sort of recognizing that my experience of that, like I experienced a lot of stuff interpersonally, but when people look at me, they don't necessarily always put that on me. And I think that is really important to talk about, right? That not all people who may have like be ethnically Asian may experience that projection whenever they walk into a room. And that may give them more privilege, or it may be other projections, right? Because of other races they may have, or other racial backgrounds they may have.
Thanks for sharing, Jasmine. If I may add, well, I guess in my experience, the thing that irks me the most currently, about the model minority playing out is I look at institutions, even ones that I work in, pretty mainstream, not so rad, and I see that hiring an Asian person lets them get their diversity higher, and they're banking on certain things like we're not going to rock the boat, we're going to achieve very high, and the expectations are set so high that the minute I don't meet them, it's like whereas, I'm not saying, I definitely think that Black folks in institutions that are structured that way have even more challenges than we may experience, like, as non-Black folks within, and with folks who have with folks who play an interesting role in white supremacy in terms of, the model minority in that holding up anti-Blackness, etc. The other thing I want to add is that for South Asians, in general, as and I guess that's an oxymoronic statement because you can't generalize the South Asian culture. And so for me, being Indian Hindu, like I feel like even the stereotype of the model minority and the stereotypical Indian or South Asian and folks using that interchangeably, when really it's like we have a whole host of countries that make up South Asia, you know, from Nepal, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and it's like all of that collapses in this idea of model minority and this idea of what South Asianness is, and there becomes this like hegemonic, this overpowering idea of a South Asian being like a typical Indian person, a typical Hindu person, you know, like that, like our culture is the one that dominates, and it's not folks who have experienced different oppressions in South Asia. And I think we see this the most in media. And you know, Mindy Kaling had that show out. What was it called? Never Have I Ever. And I think that South Asian folks, there was a lot of discourse going on around, I mean, maybe in the Asian community as a whole, but for South Asians, it was a lot because there was casteism there. There was, and that too was like the main character was a model minority, you know, pinned as someone who was trying to achieve and then, you know, also trying to have her love life, but always being like the geeky girl. I guess I didn't really watch beyond the first episode, but because it was pretty typical. But anyway, thanks for letting me share.
No, thank you for sharing. All right, so like I posted in the chat, I'm gonna do a little remix on this. Have you ever seen allyship manifest during COVID or other world events? Now, if you haven't, right, because maybe you went home, you're doing a detox from social media, because you know it's been hectic these past couple of weeks, months. I don't know. I lost track of time. So anyway, if you haven't seen any of those examples of allyship, what would you like others to do to be a proactive and also intersectional ally, right? Because oftentimes when we say ally, people might be like, "Oh, I'm just going to attend some parades," but like that's different from when we are actually advocating for policy change and also societal change. So yeah, who wants to take this one? And answer how you will with this.
It's been a hard year. Like along with COVID, a lot of other stuff happened with, you know, the dialogue about police brutality and injustices against the Black community have come up. I did see allyship in that respect. And then, which was awesome. I belong to a very inclusive whole studio, and everybody reached out to me about if I was okay and do I need anything. So that was awesome. With the issues with the discrimination against Asian people, which was excavated by the soon-to-be ex-president's incendiary rhetoric on Twitter and whatnot. I didn't see a ton of allyship there, and that kind of made me sad. It was just us talking about it. So, and you know, it's such an untouched upon topic that I'm not really sure what to ask white folks for in that. So y'all have to help me out. Like, I feel like the only people who are reblogging or who were sharing anything on that topic was people in our community. And it was almost like maybe we shouldn't say anything.
I definitely hear that and echo that. I think, you know, I had, you know, some really close friends that checked up on me, but I didn't have a lot of, you know, people who even recognize that this could be affecting people's mental health, right? And so that's definitely one thing I would say is like the first step is literally just recognize that, right? Like recognize that it's been hard to see all of this happen. And then being also like, I think like being a disabled Asian person, with COVID being simultaneously like blamed on Asian people, but also like mostly white people not taking the pandemic seriously. And I can't leave my house because I'm immunocompromised, right? And so it's this like, I've been really frustrated and angry because it's like, you know, like, you're blaming me for this pandemic, but you're not taking it seriously, and I'm trapped in my house until y'all get your shit together, right? And I'm not talking about, you know, people who have to work, people who are essential workers, people who are houseless right now. I'm talking about the people having parties and, like, you know, just like traveling to, like, I don't know, like other places. And so I don't know, like, I definitely echo that. I think like I would just love to see allyship for a lot of different things, you know, like, and being disabled, seeing how many disabled people have died from COVID, right? And it's like, how do queer Asian disabled people feel about all of this, right? And so that's something that, yeah, that's what's on my mind.
If I may add, I'm sorry, I just visually need the question one more time.
You're good.
Oh, allyship, yes. So during COVID itself, have been reflecting on how us as Asians, and not to generalize, but I think this varies. It's very, you know, to varying degrees. I think that we were, our sense of just having like an auntie network or community, our sense of community and culturally that we may have been raised with, kind of helped me, you know, feel comfortable like reaching out to others, like, hey, I can't go to the grocery store. You have an avocado? You in the same way that these like buy nothing groups or like or online groups have kind of like popped up within COVID. I feel like many of our parents may have been doing this already for decades and decades, and it's really interesting to see that America and its individualistic culture has like kind of had to shift and shape in this way that even as a small way to give away things, you know, and I'm sure that, you know, it's been there, but it's kind of been at the forefront of my mind, and how I've seen, and so yeah, and I will name that I personally also, like, you know, very much try to check in on folks who have been affected by the rhetoric around the virus and the offensive terms, you know, the virus being linked to countries, etc. And but that's not something that I've experienced directly, and that's a privilege that I have even within us as this group of Asians. I also would want to say the question says other world events, and I've been reflecting on what kinds of allyship we've seen during the uprisings, and that has been, yeah, that, I mean, I can't even, yeah, I guess I don't have the words right now. One thing I did want to add in terms of COVID again, I've seen that us as folks, as Asians in our different little bubbles around town, each like individually be contributing to mutual aid funds or like helping run mutual aid funds that then all kinds of allies can contribute to. And what's really great is like our auntie network comes in hand sometime, because if I'm affiliated with the one that always doesn't have the cash to help everybody, I text, you know, a fellow Asian of mine that I've organized with before who is doing that same work on campus and asking like, hey, I can't help this person, but can you help this person right now? And I think that that's like allyship and solidarity within ourselves, but then outside of that, in terms of folks are contributing to these funds that Asians are very much a part of and in need of. And I think that that's just been really interesting. But yeah, sorry for the ramble again.
I actually wanted to, if I can like jump in, Jasmine, I really like what you said about how we've kind of fallen back on things that our elders have been doing for a really long time. I'm fortunate enough that like my mother, my sister, and my brother-in-law and my niece all live within 5 miles of me. So and this is probably one of the reasons why this question kind of, sorry, there's a bug on my screen. Why this question kind of like, I'm not sure what to ask for, because we fell back into our old ways. We became very Asian, very Samoan. My brother-in-law is also Filipino. And we just completely, we started allo-parenting when some of us still had to work and some of us didn't. We started allocating our resources. I used my food stamps to feed our family. My mom had just retired. So we buckled down and we did that. And I'm so much used to the idea of don't ask white people for anything, that was a very powerful moment for for us. But I think there's also, again, it goes back to that maybe model minority thing where it's like, oh, they're good, they don't need anything, or that's not our community, so we're not going to worry about them. And I just also wanted to throw out there that in our community, in the Austin Queer Asians community, like we were also communicating with each other, and it was awesome. So for a large part, I didn't personally feel like I was missing for anything. I still had contact with all of y'all, and we at least provided emotional support. But yeah, no, I wanted to touch on that, what you said.
Yeah. To add to everything everyone said, I really do want to talk about other world events. There were so many. I mean, I think there were so many. I think we think about it, right? Like we triple, quadruple, like quintuple whammy on this year, right? And we keep really holding our breaths and waiting for every single like shoe to drop when it comes to every month that passes by until 2021. I think with how Free Hong Kong, all the way to every single fire that's been set off this year, one of them being a gender reveal party. Don't even get me started as a trans person. I can't believe that happened. The sky turning orange, and the Black Lives Matter movement, and the consistent uprising that I have seen so many affinity groups, organizations, individuals really, really show up. And I think this city has seen a very interesting side and a very violent side of how it comes to talking about individuals practicing their First Amendment right and showing up in protest, showing up in solidarity, showing up in empathy and sympathy when it comes to how Black lives are perceived in this country, right? And this country and many others in the last few decades, maybe the last few hundred years, the increased sensation of polarization has really shown how community organizing and individuals within community, whether it be individualistic or not, it really comes together about what those conversations look like, right? I have never seen my parents talk about what Black lives are like in this country until this year, right? I've never seen how this election made most of my aunts and uncles vote, and they haven't voted in 20 or 30 years, right? And to be able to work professionally and personally with an election, as well as continue to talk to my community members here in Austin, it is this exhausting and frustrating thing to see only ourselves talk about, like how Jasmine said, and how Jay has said, only ourselves talking about what COVID is doing to communities in this city and throughout the country and around the world. I think I've seen the most allyship on TikTok. I'm gonna name it. It was a staple of this year. TikTok has been one of the staples of allyship this year, and it is one of the quickest 1-minute video, shortened, well-edited versions of talking about what anti-Asian sentiment is doing to our communities. Because it can be quickly shared and it can be scrolled through. You can follow up on the sound. Like, I've not seen this many. I felt alone before TikTok talking about what anti-Asian sentiment was doing to our communities. And to be able to see this many young people with varying identities talking about how Asianness and the first time I ever heard someone telling an Asian person, like, y'all got it good, Asian racism is over. And then a TikToker snapping back and not being Asian, being like, no, it is still ongoing. It is still ongoing. It has been ongoing since ever. One of the only legislations to bar a specific racial group in this country is against Asians. It is legitimate by the state, right? And to be able to not really attach ourselves as individuals who want to cooperate with our communities, as well as our community cooperating with every other uprising that's happening in this country. It's very interesting to watch what comes next after this, right?
I may add onto that. Thank you, Nathan. I think you laying out your thoughts helped me maybe try and articulate what I was trying to say earlier about the uprisings here in the city of Austin. I guess again, talking referring back to our cultures and these elements that maybe if we have these common elements, I don't want to generalize either, but I've always looked at like South Asian culture in or specifically mine, though also Pakistani. So anyway, now I'm rambling to myself. I've always seen I've always looked at our parents or elders' ability to pull together any kind of event, any kind of, whether it's around celebration, wedding, a baby, funerals, and come together en masse, and get the food, get the music if appropriate, get what the materials, and all just everybody bring what they have and coordinate so rapidly. And I've always just envied, like, I've always seen it as, if my uncles were really into more like progressive stuff that helped our society rather than just like themselves and their businesses, like it would, I mean, to really shift like our elders and even in our like our peers towards being in solidarity with queer Asianness, trans Asianness, and then come out in force. Like, think of all the materials and the skill and the things that we could construct in allyship with folks who are oppressed like us, and oftentimes more than us. And so back during the uprisings here, I remember distinctly Asian comrades, who maybe couldn't be on the ground because of whatever, because I neither could I, but still coordinating supplies. Like, hey, you need a person, like, oh, okay, I'm going to tell you where to drop these supplies off, and I'll tell you where the person is on the corner, and you just go down, and like, I'm here if you need help or if you get stopped or whatever. And just rapid succession of that for like however long it lasted, over a few weekends. So that was incredible to see. And then I want to bring to the forefront, I think something you said, Nathan, helped me touch on the fact that we had an Asian man killed here in Austin by the police in was it, I think it was July 31st, maybe August of 2019. Maurice De Silva, he was Sri Lankan, and he was also experiencing a mental health crisis. And that's like, and so when we are all in this fight, and these and the ways that we lend ourselves to the uprising, like that's like solidarity, that's allyship and solidarity with other groups, and for ourselves, and fighting for ourselves and fighting for other folks, namely Black folks who are experiencing the bulk of this, with lending support to the BLM movement. Yeah, thanks.
Hey, Jasmine, do you want to answer that question that we got in the chat earlier?
Hello. So I think we got a question saying, following up on Jasmine's mention of mistreatment due to being perceived as more American white within their family, did that treatment look like, if open to sharing? I think maybe I didn't communicate well enough. I was being mistreated because I was Asian by my white family, not mistreated by my Asian family for being more white. And just wanted to make sure that was clear. But I think like it like, for example, being like, recently I was disowned by my white family after coming out as trans, but the reason cited was because I was calling them out on anti-Asian oppression, right? And so to me that seems it's not just about transphobia, and it's not just about anti-Asian stuff, and it's also ableism is mixed up in there as well. But it's about the experience of racist transphobia, or transphobic racism, or ableist transphobia, or ableist racism, right, et cetera, right? And so I think that that comes up, like that comes to mind a lot when I think about, you know, family dynamics and also just societal dynamics. It's not just necessarily the transphobia or the racism. It's the, when they compound, it can be even more painful. But also just wanted to make sure that people understood that I wasn't saying I was being mistreated for seeming more white or American.
Okay, thank you, Jasmine. All right, so I'm gonna do a remix of this question that was originally in our agenda. So what is it like to be queer and Asian in Austin? And have you ever experienced with the thoughts or any actual personal interactions on erasure, whether it's in your professional life, your personal life, and or academically, because some of us are students, and any and beyond, right? So you can touch on any of those. But yeah, how you wanted to answer that?
I think I touched on that earlier when I'd mentioned that there's not a huge, well, it's a lot larger now than it was in the 90s, but there's not like a massively huge Asian community in Austin, right? And so I grew up in South Austin, moved to Round Rock, and then ended up graduating from Pflugerville. And there is actually where I experienced racism, like in my face. And there, everybody was segregated. So and I'd never experienced that before in Round Rock or in South Austin in my life. And there, it was like the Asian kids only spoke to the Asian kids, and there was like a criteria for being Asian. And the Black kids were only allowed around, or were only around each other, and then the white kids were only talking to each other. And I couldn't fit into any of those groups because I was all three. And a lot of that I've experienced personally has come from our own community. And there's like some kind of criteria, and I'm not sure if it has to do with religion or appearance or my grade point average or any of those other kind of unfortunate model minority stereotypes. But I've ended up just kind of not telling people that I'm Asian because they're not going to accept it anyway. Or they're going to say, and I've gotten this from white people quite a bit, you're not Asian. And you know, I really am, like I totally am. And it's like and that's a really painful experience. It's like being told you're not trans enough, or you're not gay enough, or the kind of discrimination that bisexual people that date somebody of the opposite sex get, or something like that. For some reason, my mind is drawing those comparisons. But I mean, the experience has been much better in recent years since I've decided to actually go out and meet others like me, like everyone we have here. So that's been a great experience, and I feel like we're doing really, really good work, and it's also a place for my child. My child has never experienced, you know, people that are not in that model minority matrix, and until I took them to Austin Queer Asians and had them participate in what we do. So that has been a pretty awesome thing. There's more work to do, I'm sure. I'd like to see a lot more of us, and yeah.
I hope you can pass my adoration to your child. Your child is awesome. They're so
Thank you.
cool. They're such a cool
They miss all of you.
Oh, don't make me cry right now.
They've asked about Nathan and Quỳnh-Hương. I mean, but we just visited Quỳnh-Hương, so but they have asked.
Oh, okay. Anyway, due to assimilation, due to family perfectionism, professional and personal sphere, all those things, I've had to compartmentalize. So it's hard to answer this question with an and. Typically, I answer this question with an or, right? Because of the convenience of the ones that surround me, I have to fight if I want to include both at the same time. And so it was one of the main sticking points of why after we did our first event, to all the Asians we hadn't heard from before, why we started this group, why we started Austin Queer Asians, is because I've never heard about what it was like for a queer Asian man to date in this city, right? I never heard stories and the power that we have as individuals in this city to be able to write our own narrative, to be able to draw from all of the blood and flesh that we bring with us, right? And show it beautifully and powerfully. You know, being queer in this city, there is an expectation of how we, it comes with femphobia, it comes with just stereotyping in general, right? And as a non-binary person, the expectation of a non-binary person is this assigned female at birth, white, skinny, and fashionable. And I'm none of those things. And so to predominantly be invalidated by not only media, but like reshared media among our own community is difficult, right? And then, you know, being Asian in this country, in this city specifically, you know, I live in South Austin, like Riverside area, and all the good Asian food is like all spread across like West Side all the way to where MT Mart is, right? And then H Mart just opened up last year, Daiso just opened it up now, right? And the reason why it's like important why I name these places is because it's food, it's like it's access to the vegetables and the fruits and the meat and the spices that like gave me life as a child, right? And to try and answer that question, and right here in this space, it's racist and hard. It's racist and hard to be in this city. So and you know, I was a regular to 4th Street to be able to do HIV prevention, right? And I remember this one time when I was doing happy hour, which is typically old gays. And I want to be able to bring up age in this space because I was giving out condoms to individuals who were drinking at 4 p.m. watching football, like at a gay bar. And I gave this person their condoms, their lube, their information. And then as they were walking away, they said thank you to me. And I was like, okay, cool. And then they bowed to me with clasped hands. And so it was one of the most rough experiences because I was just like, get your condoms and leave. Like, I'm done. Like, I need to talk to the next person behind you. Like, it was like that interaction was, there's no chance for bystander intervention from either my coworkers or my volunteers. It was just done, over. They left the bar with you know, the buzz that they got and the condoms that I gave them. Right. And so that's part of personal and professional. Right. And so, you know, with that, like, that's the exact opposite of what I wanted to happen in that moment. And I didn't know it was going to be there. And so that's why I hammered down the experience and the work that individuals need to do through education, right? Because if they Googled that, maybe they wouldn't got maybe 2 YouTube videos saying it's okay, and then maybe thousands and thousands of articles and YouTube videos saying it's not okay to do that. But to talk about erasure, right? I tan well, I tan powerfully, and it feels good, you know, being Southern Vietnamese, like that is like where it feels right to be out in the sun and humidity. And so being of tropical body and in Central Texas where it's just not that humid, I just like I cringe sometimes putting on moisturizer. But the reason why I bring this up is because there are so many Latinx and Latin folks here in the city. I often would get seen to be of Latin descent and confused for that. And it was so frustrating because it would benefit me professionally as I was serving the city in HIV prevention and predominantly HIV affects Black and brown folks more so than other individuals of ethnic background. And so it was to be professionally incentivized to be darker so that I would be seen a certain way. And that was really hard. And that was like this physical erasure and not only emotional erasure. And so it sucks sometimes. But to bring it back to the silver lining, being part of Austin Queer Asians has been one of the most validating things. I've never celebrated Chinese/Vietnamese New Year with other queer and trans Asians. And it was one of the most liberating and beautiful things ever. And I mean, Lunar New Year, thank you. And it was just good food, good talk. I didn't have to explain myself. And that's one of the best things about being part of Austin Queer Asians. It's just like, if I have to explain myself, it's just like, bam, bam, that's what I mean. Not, okay, so here's the history of the two colonistic powers and dominations of Vietnam. And this is why I feel like that. And this is why we say cafe instead of coffee. And this is why, it's just, I don't have to explain my whole history that I carry around with me. It's just there, and people accept it when I come into spaces like this with Austin Queer Asian.
Yeah, I definitely want to echo the idea that being an Austin Queer Asian is racist and hard. I think and I also, people very rarely see me as Asian, but they quite often see me as non-white. And so it's very interesting to navigate spaces where sometimes I'm seen as white, sometimes I'm seen as not white, but never seen as Asian. And so I've also been mistaken for Latinx many, many times. I've had a lot of people try and talk to me in Spanish, and I'm like, that's cool, but I don't know it. But no one knows that I'm Asian until I tell them, or unless they're also half Asian. I feel like the only people who know that I'm half Asian are half Asians. But I think, being in a very white liberal city is frustrating because people think they're not racist, and it doesn't matter what you say, they will continue to believe that. And I think in a lot of ways, I've lived my whole life in Austin, and so being there's a certain kind of what's the word, insidiousness that comes with white liberalism and neoliberalism. There's people being more people really want to look diverse and they really want to seem diverse, but I think there's a lot of not wanting to actually do any of the work or any of the growth or any of the hard conversations necessary for that to happen. And so I think just being around a lot of and it's really interesting because, I'll hear a lot of white queers say oh, it's so great to be queer in Austin. And I'm like, yeah, it's great to be white and queer, and I experience some of that too when people see me as white, right? Where it's wow, it's so nice. But then that's just not true all the time, right? And so I think that we do have a large queer presence in Austin, but white queer folks really need to understand that it's not good for all queer folks. It's good for some queer folks. I think another thing that's and sort of going off of like what Nathan was saying about the I've also felt like I've had to fragment myself in many spaces, right? Can't be queer and Asian and disabled. That's just too much. You've reached your like oppression quota or whatever, is what I feel like people like, you know, think of me when I say out those things, where I can't necessarily go into a queer space and feel like it's not full of white supremacy. I can't necessarily go into a POC space and feel like it's not super homophobic, right? Or queer phobic. And then adding disability on top of that, like none of those spaces are actually accessible, right? So it's like, how do I even go in the first place? Is a whole different conversation. But I think just like, there's not a lot of room, I think, in general in Austin for intersectionality, for in-betweens. And I would love to see more spaces where people can show up as their whole self instead of having to fragment themselves to be accepted.
If I may, or Jay, did you want to go ahead?
No.
Right. I was just
You go ahead.
who else may have unmuted themselves. Yeah, to go off of what Jasmine said, I had the same thought about, well, for one, I think that I'm picky, but really I'm finding that it's just like I can't be my whole self in very many spaces in Austin, and that's just the truth. And I've gotten very good at curating, so it's fine, I guess. But you know, it's, you know, whenever really bad things happen to me, and I guess to be I mean, well, for one example is in my neighborhood, I mentioned that I was disabled. There are some days where I can't walk a ton, or I can't breathe well when I'm walking because I was born with a heart condition. And so there was one time you know, there's like the leasing office and just like the block, and there's no like truly accessible parking, but you know, it's all parking. And so I was in the fire lane for like 60 seconds. I needed to walk right into the office, grab some flowers that a friend had delivered, and walk right out. So I parked in the fire lane for 60 seconds, and I come, even on my way in, this guy who my ass is so dumb, because I look at his hair and I'm like, hey, we have the same haircut, what's up? And he's actually like, oh, well, you know, you can't park there. And he's like, I'm going to call the cops. And so, you know, and that ensues, and I end up being recorded and harassed a little bit. But my question is like, what part of it was it that got him? Was it my queerness? Was it that I look like a girl boy? Was my brownness? Was it just the fact that I am disabled in that sense, and I just had to be there in that moment? And like, and what is it that like that happened to me in that moment? And yet every Sunday I watch like white people park in that spot and walk their way to the farmer's market, you know? And it's just like a mind cluster mix of just like, what is going on here? Is this racism? And as me, who's someone like who really is sensitive and critical of this idea of like of because of who I am, like as a relatively privileged person within the South Asian hierarchies, or like hierarchies of oppression that exist. I am like an upper caste privileged Indian who is a Hindu, but you know, so I get really resistant to being like, oh, woe is me, like racism happens to me, like my experiences suck, and like, you know, because I think of like all of it, like if this is what I'm experiencing, the folks that are less privileged than me are experiencing so much more. And so I would say when I was looking over the questions, the first word that kind of like came to me was traumatic, to be a queer Asian in Austin. And I'm sure that's true of many folks of color and many other queer communities of color in this town as well. And there are no intersectional spaces, but people love to tokenize, you know, and say like, oh, we have an Asian, you know, and set one of us up as the representative for all, and that's just not how you're going to achieve true intersectionality in these spaces where people feel like they can be themselves in their whole selves. And there was another part of this question that I wanted to address, if I may look at it in writing for 1 second. Yeah, so thoughts on erasure. I will actually say that if there are any South Asians in the audience, and I know there's one because I see your name, please feel free to go ahead and put in the chat and chime in as to your experiences of being erased. Because again, as I've said, like I kind of have to me, I guess I've just had to, yeah, I mean, in acknowledging my privileges, like I haven't had that on my radar in some time, and I'm just like, okay, it is what it is. Like, move on. Like, there are other things, you know, to get back to. Like, there's a pandemic, there's an uprising, there's how can your work serve to push like what you're trying to build, and that's and erasure is not me like being harassed on my street. So I tend to just let that kind of go sometimes, and I'm like, oh, I feel, you know, and a lot of times I just chalk up erasure to like being like woman identified. I'm like, oh, is that gendered? Okay, maybe it's gendered, but you know, but I am a girl. So anyway, now I'm rambling. I would say South Asians, if you felt erased, put it in the chat and we'll get to read it there. But that's it. Thanks.
Okay. Jae, did you get a chance to speak?
I did, but were we doing the dating question or were we doing an alternative question?
Yes, so we're gonna do a remix, another remix. I love to do remix. So if you feel comfortable sharing about your experience when it comes to dating in the queer community, please share, and how have your views have changed over time. If you don't feel comfortable asking that, we also have the question of what does support in the community looks like in need of your opinion, or how have you seen community come together? But I want to give y'all options because, you know, sometimes I don't want to talk about my dating life. It's okay. And then other times, you know, I'm down for it if you give me a few drinks. But that's okay.
I can try. I am Jasmine Bell and Jasmine have both mentioned about tokenism and about trying to pick and choose which parts of themselves to present. And especially here in Austin, that's been, you know, and honestly, I've been doing that my entire life with being Black, with being Samoan, with being Asian, that I'm so inured to it that it didn't even cross my mind to think about how I've been discriminated against, because it happens every day. It literally happens every day in microaggressions or in things that, you know, we've learned to just kind of brush off. But I'm absolutely terrified of dating in Austin, and especially, that's what I was going to say. It seems so much like there's this kind of pretentious fake openness here in Austin, where everybody here is, because they are so educated and because they're so comfortable with it and because they're from California and there's gay people everywhere there or something like that, that they think that they're not bigoted, and they are. And that was very plain to me more than anything. And I'm like, you know, it's very uncomfortable when you've been somewhere almost your entire life and you realize that you don't know them and they don't know you. And that they don't really want to get comfortable with you. It's more of a name only thing. So yeah, that was my 2 cents.
Thank you so much, Jae.
What's that?
Yeah, thank you so much. You flipping nailed it on the head right there. I mean, hit the nail on the head. There we go.
I nailed it.
You nailed it. There you go. I'll also try to answer, what does support look like, right? How have I seen the community come together? Like, support, socials, just anything fun. I want joy. I want more of that. Please, please. And I do play a part, and I have responsibility to try and create that as well in how I want to bring that to the table as well, right? And so it brings so much happiness whenever I used to hate Facebook, and now I see so many people like smiling and stuff. And that just gives me so much joy as well. Seeing y'all smile has been good. And the community has really, really come together. And I think prior to that, there was the status quo of understanding that we don't really need to have those hard conversations yet. But now I think the percentage, we're trending upward. Those hard conversations are happening. Fragility is something that's being chipped away sometimes from white folks, and it's good. It's good. So yeah, that's what I got.
Yeah, dating as a queer Asian person, but also as a disabled and fat person, full of fetishization. Just like, I think that at some point I realized at some point that I hadn't had any sexual or romantic experiences that weren't based in fetishization in some form, right? And once I realized that, I was like, oh, that sucks. Fetishization has a really hard impact on people, and I wish that we talked about it more. So I don't know, just like, it's like, and then being on sort of the intersections of other things, like the politics of desire and desirability just like really plays into that, into like, you know, who is seen as sexual to begin with, right? Non-disabled people. Everyone thinks disabled people can't have sex or something, which is really funny to me, but talk to me about that later. And yeah, but I guess like for some of the other questions, I am really excited that I found Austin Queer Asians, because I feel like I like sort of knew that they existed, but then because life didn't have any time to do anything. And then I don't know, I'm really excited to be more involved with Austin Queer Asians, because I feel like I started getting more involved after COVID. And so it's like harder to, you know, do things. And so I don't know, just like more spaces for queer Asians to be queer Asians would be really nice. Also just, you know, like general things like healthcare, and, you know, all the things that affect queer and trans people in general still affect queer, like Asian queer people, right? And I think like one, you know, so I haven't had a lot of chance yet to be super involved in all of Austin Queer Asian stuff, but one thing I did was a part of that really made me really happy was we did like a mail exchange type thing. And I was really nervous because I was worried about like sending mail is really hard for me, and was worried about leaving my house and all of this stuff. But people were really nice about it, and somebody offered to come like pick it up, but I didn't need it because then I had somebody else deliver it anyway. But then sort of like being able to send something that I made to another queer Asian in Austin, and then receiving something from another queer Asian in Austin was a really cool experience. And the reason I stopped my video earlier was because I was trying to see if I could find the little art piece that somebody made for me, but I couldn't. But I would just love to have, like, I don't know, like Nathan said, more joy. It's really hard to come by joy nowadays in a lot of different ways. And just like support us, protect us, celebrate us. Yeah.
All right.
If I may.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. I will say I've only been single in Austin for maybe like 9 months or something. You know, I moved here with a partner like 4 or 5 years ago, and then I was single for a bit. Now I'm partnered. My partner's really awesome. So anyway, so I have like in that short time where I was dating, even prior to like even moving here, I've always gotten like one of two things. There has been an element of fetishization, but it's been weirdly specific, where it's always like, do your parents know you're gay? Like, oh, it's like an Indian woman. Like, do your parents know? I'm like, why? That's like the biggest turnoff ever. Why do you have to bring my parents into this conversation? And like for someone who also, like, I'm 32 now, and I was closeted to my parents until I was 29 or 30. And like, I mean, that's like, and yeah, I don't like saying like that's really late. As someone who came out late in life, because I think folks come out at all ages increasingly, and like as Gen Z kind of like really leans into their queerness and gender queerness, we're gonna see people of all ages kind of find themselves in that way. So yeah, it's always, your parents know you're gay. I'm like, what does that have to do? I'm independent. But anyway, and then another one I've gotten is I need to find an Indian woman who cooks for me. And this like reads more to me as like gender policing than anything else. Like it's yeah, I don't know, I shudder. And like, and it's just, there's so much. And as someone who is like, yeah, I'm womanish, I got, you know, because I almost am like, you know, like gender's an everyday thing that I feel like everyone it's like figuring out themselves. But yeah, it's yeah, those are two big ones. And so I've noticed also that when trying to avoid that, you know, you safely make the assumption that that comes from the white gaze, which means then that the dating pool is just much smaller in Austin by virtue of Austin being what, like 60-70% white folks, and then a portion of the POC folks are actually queer or queer accepting, and then, you know, and then dating, and it's seems like slim pickings. I remember when I was partnered and was about to be single, I was like, oh, I do not want to date in this town. Oh my gosh, that is like, oh, I was like definitely scared. But yeah, but I've also gotten that stereotypical, I need to find an Indian woman who cooks for me from other POC, so that's interesting. Okay, I'll stop there. But yeah.
You're good. So I do want to recognize that it is close to 7 o'clock. So we're just gonna finish up with this last question right here for all of our panelists. So in 1 to 4 sentences, what does hope look like to you, or how do you see the future in the next 5 years? What is your favorite part of being queer and Asian in Austin?
I can go. Being queer and Asian in this city will get better. It will. I'm demanding it. I'm saying it. It will happen. It will. And that gives me hope. That gives me so much hope. And to be able to say that, and to be able to see the faces I see right now, and to be able to continue organizing when we can see each other again, when I can continue organizing online, like that is one of the best things to see, is people continuing to come together. Like being able to eat, cook, and talk to each other about how we are experiencing our lives together, that is one of the best things. And it will get better.
For me, hope. Hope is an interesting word because I don't always feel hopeful, but I think that I feel the most hopeful when I think about I think a lot about cross-movement organizing and how important that is for people who live on intersections. That brings me hope. I think getting more connected to the wisdom of queer people who have come before us and our own ancestors brings me hope. And just like the knowledge that comes with that may have been either pushed down or not allowed or anything like that. And the work that queer and trans people of color have been doing forever always brings me closer to hope than not. And so those are the things that bring me hope.
I guess I'll go next. I have the unique position of being having insight to what the young people are doing through my child. And so for me, hope is seeing these kids grow up more queer positive, more body positive, and more diverse. My child has become a little LGBTQ activist, so perhaps they can take lessons from some of you. But it is awesome to see them angry and enraged about sometimes perceived slights against who they are. And my favorite thing about being in the queer Asian community here in Austin is that it's like it's our family. You know, our cultures don't necessarily always accept that we're that we're queer. They don't understand it, and it doesn't go in line with tradition. And we're creating that ourselves, and we're still who we are. We're still Asian, and that is magic to me. That's awesome.
Yeah, I would say that my hope is definitely kids who are being raised with some or without some of the difficulties. I mean, from parents that we may have experienced, like seeing Jay's child. Like I remember a Lunar New Year that was really great. It was meaningful to me too, and 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 that's my favorite part of being queer and Asian in Austin is Austin queer Asians and the community that's built, and also Kush ATX, the South Asian group, who actually would welcome all of us, I'm sure. Yeah, and that was like my first real collective that I'd found of queer South Asians when I moved here, and just found Kush ATX on meetup.com. And I remember that time I was like so closeted. I like messaged off my white partner's meetup account, and I was like, hey, because like I have family here and networks are so like tight, I feel like. But I love it. It's gorgeous to see the things that we build and experience with each other when we find each other. And it's fun, and it involves music, food, and dancing, and it's really amazing. But yeah, it's my favorite thing.
All right. Is there any last questions, comment, queries? Get it, queries? No? No? Okay. Sorry, y'all. Chicago, my jokes are so bad. So bad. Okay, only my dog has to deal with it.
I like how you blame Chicago on that.
Deal with it. I can hang with them. Yeah, they're way too. They're dealing with the snow right now, so they don't care. Anyway, I want to turn it back to Nathan and Wes. My job of moderating is over.
Go ahead first, Wes.
I just wanted to thank all of the panelists. Y'all made me cry 6 times, goosebumps twice, and I want to cry right now. Just thank you for allowing me to be here and listen and learn and just sit back and shut up. It's super important to me to trying to be an ally, and I know I'm never going to be perfect, but I'm trying, and I'm so grateful that I can be here, and that y'all would share your stories, and that y'all would be open, because I know it's hard to be open about these things, and it can be painful. And so I'm just glad that y'all would take the time to be here and share y'all's stories. And I hope that moving forward that I can continue being a better ally with y'all. So yeah, I just want to get tears. So I'm going to switch over to Nathan.
Thank you, Wes. Thank you to Out Youth for this amazing opportunity. This collaboration will hopefully bring a lot more information to the surrounding Austin area, as well as Austin, about what it's like to be queer and Asian, and how we lead very, very different narratives and important narratives. Thank you so much for all of the participants today, all the panelists. Thank you, Quỳnh-Hương, for moderating today. You did an amazing job. And thank you to all of the attendees today for sitting down and having some Asian tea with us. It was really nice to be able to share everything that we have tonight. And I hope you have a beautiful weekend. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.